Welcome GRD131, Graphic Design 1. And the purpose of this video, this isn't an exercise video, this video is just to go over a couple things, and I'm going to go over text logos because we've been dealing with text logos before we got into the roofing ad, and I just wanted to show you some examples and go over them a little bit, and hopefully it'll reinforce some of the concepts that we've been working on with some of the previous exercises with type personalities and making sure that things don't clash with each other. Now, I found these in the wild, meaning I was coming up my basement steps and saw two bags laying around. One was a big bag that was holding all kinds of plastic bags, and it was for the Children's Place. Now, I don't know if the Children's Place even exists anymore at the mall. I haven't been to the mall for a while, but there used to be a place called the Children's Place. Now my kids are grown and in high school and college, so I won't be going to the Children's Place, but I do remember going there when I was younger, and I don't know if it's still there, but this is their logo, or at least the logo they had then on a bag. This other one up here is called the Shelby, and it's a restaurant, and I guess this was just on some white takeout bag or leftovers or something for there. So I just wanted to go over these quickly. First, the Children's Place. Let me go over this one first. I'll scroll down here and I'll just zoom in a little bit. Now, this logo here is basically just a serif font. It's not even a bold serif font. It's just smaller and larger. And that's what I'm trying to get across when we're doing type logos, is that we need contrast first. What stands out? Well, place stands out. Just like that Moravian College one a little bit, where we spread things out, it was the same font. So they're using the same font, except the contrast here is scale. Place is really big. Children's is smaller. Now, what they did with Children's to make it even lighter and to make place seem a little bolder, even though it isn't, is they spread out the tracking, the letter spacing on this. So I just wanted to point that out, and they brought it kind of closer together so it sits on top like a little hat or a roof or something on there, so it kind of makes a rectangular shape, and it kind of makes a logo. So this is a perfect example of a text-based logo using just one font, and the contrast strategies they're using here, or emphasis strategies, however you want to look at it, is making one larger and one smaller. So one's probably more than double the size of this. If you look at the height, it's probably more than double the size of that. And they made that very large, and then they just made this smaller, maybe a third of the size or somewhere around there, and then just spread out the tracking to keep it nice and lighter. Because if it was actually that regular size, it would probably only come to here, and it probably wouldn't look right centered or anything like that. So they spread it out so they'd have the same alignment on either side. So they're aligned the same way on either side, and they make this nice little box, just like some of those make-believe logos we were working with. This kind of does that as well, and it doesn't really do anything for contrast other than one is smaller and one's larger. They're the same weight font. One just appears a little thicker because it's bigger, and it's just a regular serif font. It's not even bold or anything like that. And I'll go over that in a second because I tried to recreate it. But before I do that, let me go up and look at the Shelby one. And here's another example of a type-based logo. There's no icons here. There's nothing going on. No kind of anything that's drawn in Illustrator. It's just text. And the element that stands out is Shelby, and it's in a script category font. And to contrast with that script category font, they used a sans serif font. So it is bold, but it is kind of spread out a little bit. The tracking spread out down here to make it appear lighter. Plus, it's also smaller. It's a lot smaller than Shelby. It's maybe an eighth of the size or a sixth of the size of whatever Shelby is. So we have a decorative kind of script font. Now, again, when I say decorative, a script font is being used in a decorative way. I wouldn't call this a decorative font. It's a script font. It looks like a script font. It would be in the script font category, but it's being used in a decorative way. And to contrast with this, to make this stand out, they're putting eat, drink, and cheers. Now, there's a little X here instead of a bullet, and I don't get into the bullets or anything yet, but basically that's being used in a sans serif font because that's a plain font. That's why when I was going over some of those type logos with you, I would always bring out a sans serif font because they're very plain and they don't compete with Shelby. Shelby has the green color, so it has a brighter, warmer color. This is subdued with kind of a grayer color down here. It's also in all caps. Now, what does all caps do? I mentioned before that all caps doesn't make it readable. Well, in this case, if you just have a little bit of text, you can get away with all caps, and they did spread it out. And also what all caps does is it gives you a nice alignment on the top and bottom, not just on the left and right, but on the top and bottom, so you don't have all that unevenness of upper and lowercase letters. It fits in this little nook here. I talk about a nook. Now, the one I was doing with Wally's with you guys, that was a challenge because the Y was right in the middle, and it made it really hard to put anything underneath that logo. But with the Shelby, this Eat, Drink, Cheers fits really nice here because the Y is at the end. So it creates a nice little nook for this to fit in, and it gives you a nice kind of like top to bottom movement here with this Y at the bottom. Now, obviously, you can't, just make up a name because it has a Y at the end, but we had Wally's, it had an apostrophe S on it or something like that. But having a Y at the end is helpful because it gives you a nook, and that's what they did here. Now, the only thing I'd wonder is why didn't they put the in this nook? Because there's a nook between the ascenders on the L and the H. Remember, this Y is the descender. It's a descender coming down here. So they fit in this nook here very nicely. And I'm not sure why they didn't put the right in here. It would have fit in that nice little rectangular area nicely. But anyway, we have warm and cool between the green. Now, green sometimes can be a cooler color, but in this case with gray, it's more of the warmer color. So it stands out a little bit against the gray because gray is more of a neutral. So that's being used for contrast. Size contrast. This is large, that's small, and this is small. And also font category contrast. This is a script font. This is a sans serif. They didn't put an italic here or anything else. They kept it very different. Matter of fact, this is in upper lowercase. This is in all caps. So it's extremely different the way they did that. So they made a big difference, a big contrast between Shelby and everything else so that this takes priority and this is secondary. And that's what I'm trying to get across when we work on these logos, on these exercises, the personalities and the mishaps and things like that. Now, I even recreated this logo. I tried to recreate it. I'm probably going to do it for the typography class. I don't know if we'll do it in here. Now, here's the recreation. Now, I didn't match the font exactly, and that wasn't my intent. I could have found it and downloaded it somewhere, but I just wanted to find something similar. And by the way I found something similar, I know when we look through fonts in here, and this is group, so I'm going to click on this again, and I actually used Damien. And you might think, well, how did you find Damien? Did you just go through here and look through all these things? And you can, but I know that can be frustrating. And one other thing I want to show you, and we could do this from here on out, is when you need to look up these fonts, and the problem is they're not categorized. So, you just scroll through looking for script fonts. But if you wanted to look for script fonts, what you could do is go to Google Fonts and go here and it's just Google, just type in Google Fonts and it'll take you here. And I'm just going to go to handwriting. They call it handwriting. And I basically wrote the word Shelby down. Now, I did this for the other one for the children's place in a serif font, but I just put Shelby here and I typed it. And I tried to find something similar to that Shelby font, and I just wrote them down. I just wrote down a bunch, and I think the ones I wrote down were Damien, Yellowtail, Cookie, and Mr. Defoe. So I just went through here and I just wrote some down, and obviously some of them are different because of the Y. You can adjust the size here too. This is a little large, so I'll go smaller here because it's breaking the Y on separate lines, but you can put in whatever you want here and adjust the size and then scroll down and just look for something that looks like it. Now, I'm not trying to match the font exactly. I'm just trying to find something similar just to kind of do an example. So if I really had to match the font, I'd find that exact font. And I just went through here. There's Cookie was one that looked kind of similar because of the Y. Yellowtail was kind of similar in some ways. Now, even if something isn't on the right angle, you can always kind of tweak it a little bit. You could kind of make it more italic in a way. In other words, you could skew it and kind of make it tilt to the right if you need to. But I went through these, and that's what I did. So I went through all these fonts here. Now, there's a lot. Now, remember, these are all the Google fonts. Now, that one's not too bad, except it's a little hard to read. Any of these where you couldn't read that it said Shelby, like that's a weird-looking B there, and it doesn't really look like Shelby. Anything where you couldn't read it as Shelby, even that one it's hard to tell that it's Shelby, because it looks almost like two L's in a way, so it's hard to see it. So I went through all these, and I found like 4 of them, and then I went in here, and then I tried them next to that. I even had to modify this. This one here, if I click in here, I made the S bigger because the S was kind of smaller, and in this one, the S is at the same level as the ascenders here. But in the other one, the cap height was a little smaller, so I adjusted it a little bit. And I put the in here. I fit that little nook in here, and I didn't use these X's for bullets or whatever. I know people are having problems with bullets, and I have to get on my Windows side of my computer and work with bullets a little, other than seeing if there's something better than using Alt 0149, but I think it is, but I'm just not sure the best way to do that on a laptop. But that's all I did there, so I kind of recreated it, and it doesn't look bad. Again, it's not the same font, and I didn't find the same font, but it's the idea of a type-based logo where we're using a script font that stands out. Now, it's not as bold as that one, but this stands out, and the sans serif contrasts with it because it's very plain, it's very different. So we're not using anything that competes with that. Now, down here at the Children's Place, I wanted to just mention this too. I'll put this on. Here's the one I recreated here. And it actually wasn't easy. I had to tweak the kerning because the A and the C were a little further away. And even here, I think the L is too far from the A. I even have a kerning game that I'm using with the typography class that'll help you with kerning a little bit. But I tried to find a font that was as similar as possible. I didn't find this exact font because the serifs here, it doesn't have much of a barb on the top there. It's kind of flat like this one, but then it's kind of cut off here. This one isn't cut off. So based on the E and based on the R I was looking at there, that's how I found that. So when I went to Google Fonts and I wanted to find a Google font in Gravit that was similar to that, I went here and I went to the serif fonts. I just typed in some letters. I think the CRE is all I typed in just to see how they match up, because those were the distinctive letters, the R, the C, and possibly the E. I could have looked at the L as well. That would have been another one to look at. And I didn't find any that were perfect, but I went through and I did find some. So some of these I kind of, they have the barb on the top, the barb on the bottom. Some of them are kind of okay, but I was looking for the curved R, so I was looking for all of those. So Crimson Text was one that I think this is the one I used. I think I used Crimson Text. I think this was the one that came the closest. I had to kind of compromise. EB Garamond was close based on the R, but it was a little rounder. It just didn't look the same. The best one was Crimson Text. So I had written down some Cardo, EB Garamond, Amiro, Ovo. I wrote down a couple, and then I just tried them out when I got back to Gravit because they're all in this list. So all the fonts here in these Google fonts, when you go to Gravit, they use all these Google fonts. So when you click on here and there's Crimson Text, these fonts are all in Google Fonts. So you do have a place to go and kind of browse and look around a little bit. I know this has been a little more of a challenge, although it would be a challenge if we were in the classroom too, because we'd be just using FontBook or something on the Mac, and we'd be looking for free fonts or whatever Illustrator fonts we had. But this is nice having this ability to look through all these fonts. We have so many more than we normally have. And again, getting back to what I'm doing here, it was just the idea of making a text-based logo. And some of the things I had to do was just adjust the size to make this larger and make this smaller and spread out the tracking. Sometimes I put it right on top of the other one. And one other thing I just want to point out here is when I make one thing a color, and we haven't talked about this yet, when you go into color, normally we go to colors and we mix up a color, but they have a thing here called in use. So if a color's already being used, you can use it somewhere else. You'll see little swatches down here as you use them, as you select something and use those particular colors. So I just wanted to point that out as well, and we'll do that in the future as well. That'll help keep things a little more consistent. But again, all I wanted to do was just show you here that we're talking about text-based logos, we're talking about contrast, we're talking about all these design principles that go in to just putting two fonts together. This is just using a lot of scale, a lot of alignment, proximity somewhat, contrast of light and a little bit heavier based on the size. Here's contrast of different categories of fonts, a script font versus a sans serif font, a warm color versus a cool color, things like that. So we're always looking to develop those contrasts between things. That's why we're talking about type categories, because you don't want to use other fonts that are going to conflict with it. You wouldn't want to use, for the children's, use a different serif font. That's why we're using the same one here. Now, you could have used a bold version and a light version or whatever they used. I mean, they, not me. But you can see what's going on here. So these are real examples. So I just wanted to show you these just to kind of reinforce what we're talking about with text-based logos and just understanding what's happening with contrast, with alignment, with type categories, all that kind of stuff as we work on type logos and as we work our way into doing layouts as well.